Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and also all of you who aren't ladies or gentlemen, such as lizard people from space or killer robots from the future. Welcome to the Neoncast, Episode 4, A New Hope. Yeah. So, yes, Episode 4. And that's about it. So, thanks for listening. Bye. Joking. Anyway, welcome once again to my little corner of the internet in which I just talk about things and try to find interesting things to talk about each week and fail. It's actually been kind of a slow week in terms of news and nothing really going on in this sort of realm of stuff that interests me. But I figured I should probably do one anyway. So this week we're going to talk about crocheting and also basket weaving. So this should be fun. Yeah. Obviously not. So just another tiny tidbit of follow-up on 10 Cloverfield Lane. I mean, I'm not super excited about this movie. I know I'm talking about it quite a bit, but it's funny because it's one of the first topics I discussed. So now, like, every time I see a little tidbit of news about it, I'm like, oh, I should bring that up. But just very briefly, apparently it's scheduled for IMAX because there was a lot of discussion about whether or not it's just going to be this movie about people in a bunker. And like one of those movies where the whole point of it is like, is something crazy going outside? Are they just imagining? Is this crazy guy just keeping them there and the world outside is normal? Because it's not, it doesn't have a giant budget and they're trying to keep it kind of mysterious. But yeah, apparently it's slated for IMAX now. They do have a bit of a window, meaning that like. It comes out right around the time where like there's about a week's worth of free time for IMAX screens between bigger projects, because the IMAX is slated like it has like a whole like year's worth of schedule. Like big movies get like 3 weeks worth of IMAX, slightly smaller movies get 2 weeks, etc. And there's like a little window that it's going to occupy. So that just might be the reason that it's going to IMAX, just because there's like a free week there. But to me, that kind of implies that maybe there is something that's worth putting on one of those giant IMAX screens. I don't know if you've ever gone. I happen to be a big fan of IMAX. I find the format really cool. I'm talking also about the real legit IMAX, because if you go to IMAX, you should check this out. There's actually two kinds of IMAX. There's the real IMAX, and there's what they call the LIMAX, which is a digital IMAX. The real IMAX is 70 millimeter film. It's a gigantic screen, and by gigantic I mean it's gigantic. I mean, I've been to a digital IMAX many times. I went to a digital IMAX several times before the first time I went to a legit 70 millimeter screen. And I thought that was just IMAX. It was giant. It was great. But then I went to a real one, and it dwarfs the digital IMAX. If you Google this, you'll see there's like a diagram that shows them one next to the other. But yeah, anyway, so there might be some stuff that's worth putting on a giant screen in that movie. So maybe worth noting. And I mean, it's not coming out in that long. It's coming out pretty soon. And also I noticed that it also has a similar promotional campaign going for it. The alternate reality gaming community is kind of excited about it, the ARG community, because the first Cloverfield, which came out in January of 2008, had a pretty interesting viral promotional campaign leading up to its release in 2007. in the realm of what's called ARG, alternate reality gaming, and today is sort of loosely referred to as viral marketing. The point of alternate reality gaming, it's actually a really fascinating thing. If you want to go read about it, I'd highly recommend it. It's kind of like an interesting subculture that I was kind of involved in around 2006, 2007, and involves games that play out in the realm of the internet, and they take place in like an alternate reality, meaning that like you do things online, but you do them in character, quote unquote. Like for instance, there's a forum, Unforum, it's called Unfiction. The website has a message board, and people would post what they call trailheads there. Like someone would post like an anonymous post on that website and be like, oh, my sister has been kidnapped. Look at this video blog that I made. And you'd go like to YouTube, and it would be like a video of someone saying like, my sister has been kidnapped by aliens, and they left this note, and hold it up to the camera, and the note has some kind of code. And if you decipher it, takes you to a website, and the website has a thing, and then there's fake social media accounts, and you interact with characters in the game, like in character, like write them emails and say like, hi, I'm trying to solve the mystery of your disappearing sister. It's this kind of part role play, part scavenger hunt, part puzzle game that's sort of laid out on using the internet as its medium. It was used pretty early on as like a promotional tool for a bunch of movies. I think the very first one to do it was AI, the movie AI, which had like fake websites for like the school in it and all kinds of stuff like that. Now a lot of movies will do this to a certain extent, like have like additional content and viral content leading up to it, like The Martian, for instance, because a big premise of The Martian in the book is that their missions to Mars are like fully televised and stuff to keep like public interest high in the Mars missions. So before the movie came out, they had these like video blogs, like, look at the crew of the Ares 3 on their mission. We now cut in live to the crew of the Ares 3. And they would have like confessionals, like a la like reality show, talking to the camera, like, I miss my wife, and I'm just I'm excited to get to Mars, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the Cloverfield one, before it came out, because before Cloverfield came out, there was this whole mystery about what it was going to be. The trailers were very mysterious. Nobody was really sure what kind of movie it was going to be. It had this whole like the characters in the movie had these fake MySpace pages. There were a lot of fake websites for products, and then like you would go into like the source code for the websites. They would lead you to this other place, and it would lead you to some other place. And it's really fun. I think now it's slightly more like the marketing aspect of it has kind of pervaded it more than it used to be. I mean, it was still used as a promotional thing, but it was such a niche world that it was more about, I don't know, experimenting with forms of narrative and stuff. Because I remember there was one that I was heavily involved in, and it was a very small group of us that just dedicated ourselves to this and like spent like hours on IRC chats trying to crack these codes, weird Mayan calendar related runes and shit like that. It was pretty cool, and like I enjoy that kind of code cracking, puzzle solving kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, I said AI was one of the first movies to utilize that kind of thing. It was made by Spielberg, and Spielberg is now working on the movie adaptation of the book Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. That book's coming out. The movie's coming out in December of next year, like 2017. And that book is essentially like an ARGer's wet dream. It's an amazing book. It's not like a masterpiece of prose and of literature. It's more like a labor of love that was made by someone who truly cares about the geek community and also this kind of ARG world and attitude. And I can briefly describe the plot of this book without spoiling it too much. I mean, if you really don't want to know anything about it, you can skip ahead a couple of minutes, but the premise is it's in the near future. It's in like a sort of a mild dystopian future. The U.S. it's like poverty is it's kind of a simplistic story, but it's kind of a fairy tale, so it doesn't matter. You know, there's like the U.S. is very poor, and it's very hyper centralized in like a capitalist way. And everybody uses this thing called Oasis. It's like a virtual reality world created by this guy Halliday, who's kind of like a Steve Jobs-ish figure. And he creates this thing called Oasis, which is a virtual reality world. In it, it's like a universe, and there's planets on it, and you got the Nintendo planet, and you got the Warcraft planet, and you got the whatever planet, and some of them are educational. Like the hero of the book goes to school in Oasis. Like his school is in there, so like he'll log on, put on his goggles and his gloves or whatever, and attend classes that way, like or go to. I think it's that way. I can't remember if he actually goes physically to a school, and then they're like, well, today we're going to visit the Vatican Museum, so everybody put on your goggles and your haptic gloves, and we're gonna walk around, you know, the Vatican today and look at art. But it's like this vocational tool, and also a PvP tool. Like there's games within it and stuff. So this guy Halliday dies, and his will, he leaves like a video will, and the video will says, I've hidden like an Easter egg somewhere inside my virtual universe, and the person that finds it is gonna receive the controlling percentage of my company and become like the head of Oasis. Kind of like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It's sort of, I would call it like a cross between like Willy Wonka and maybe The Matrix or something like that, or maybe Snow Crash, if you know that book, which is also like a sort of a seminal work about like virtual reality by Neil Stephenson. But so then the main antagonist of this book is like the United States is like main like internet service provider. It's all become like conglomerated under like this one mega evil company, and they want to find Halliday's egg. They want to gain control of Oasis so they can make the internet, so they can control the entire internet, like the access to it, because they're an ISP, and also the world itself, and make it this dry corporate, you know, pay-per-view unfun place. And this kid who's like this poor kid, and a couple of friends who are Halliday egg enthusiasts try to find it too. And it's this treasure hunt. And the thing about this book that's awesome is that it's very heavily reliant on existing intellectual property. It's all about like real old school video games and movies. Halliday was like an 80s freak. He grew up in the 80s. He likes 80s movies and music and classic video games. So a lot of his puzzles are related to that. A lot of like the character customization in the book is related to real things. It's like, oh, this guy's flying around in a Millennium Falcon. This guy's flying around in the ship from Firefly, and this guy has a giant robot from this anime, and there's a lot of like existing intellectual property in it, which is really cool and used in a really sort of fun way. And for the longest time, like, I considered that book unfilmable because of that, because it has so many licensed things in it. But Spielberg, when it was announced that Spielberg was going to direct it, he's someone who could actually get that to work. I mean, if you've seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is a movie that Spielberg produced, he didn't direct. Zemeckis directed it. Spielberg produced it. Spielberg, like, got Disney and Warner Brothers to put their characters together. There's a famous scene in it where Bob Hoskins is like falling off a building, and next to him parachuting are Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny together. And that was like considered like an impossibility to see them both like together, and they kind of interact. It's really funny. And apparently only someone with like the clout of a Spielberg can get that shit done. So I would be very interested, and there's stuff in it that I don't want to spoil that would be really interesting to see how they would film and how they would sort of go about doing, because it like I said, it's heavily reliant on existing things, existing movies, existing music. But it's a really fun book. It's not long. It's kind of sort of a simple read. Really highly recommended if you enjoy like science fiction books and stuff. It's fun, and I'm quite looking forward to to that movie. Another movie that's coming out in 2007 and had a tidbit of news that I found interesting, I guess, is the Ghost in the Shell movie. Now, I'm a big Ghost in the Shell fan. I mean, a big Ghost in the Shell fan. I own all of the movies and all of the TV show. And I've been a fan of it for years. And the news that they were making it into a big budget Hollywood film with Scarlett Johansson was not something I was particularly happy about. But not because I'm not being a dick. Like I'm not one of those people who is afraid of their like favorite things being adapted. When Lord of the Rings got made, I was a big Lord of the Rings fan before that. I was all for that. Game of Thrones, I was a big A Song of Ice and Fire fan. I was like, awesome. Give me a TV show. Doesn't have to be exactly the same even. Just make it awesome and I'll have a really good time with it. I like that stuff. I don't mind. Harry Potter, I was a Harry Potter fan before the movies came out. The problem is that Ghost in the Shell, despite its appearance, like if you have a superficial acquaintance with it, it's basically in the future. It's in Japan. It's about a section of the government called Section 9. It's a kind of a police unit, but they're kind of they kind of operate like a little bit outside of the purview. It's this kind of pseudo-fascist future with like weird like layers of government, and they're somewhere in there. You know, they're like a kind of a secret-y, policey kind of thing, and they investigate sort of cyber-related crimes because it's a future in which, like, you know, there's people's brains are implanted into robots, and there's people who are half robot and half human. And the whole point of the franchise is it's a very philosophical and very sort of intellectual thing, and it deals with like the existentialism of being part man and part machine, and if your brain is no longer a biological brain but a mechanical brain, is your soul still in it, or do you even have a soul? And it's full of those kinds of discussions, like very deep discussions that invoke philosophers and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, John Locke said so and so, and how does that translate into being a human in a robot body and stuff like that. And I just don't see that translating well into a Hollywood movie, because it's a little too obtuse for general audiences. So they're just going to make it like a big flashy action movie, which, by the way, this franchise doesn't lack. Like, it has lots of cool action, and it's very visually distinct. I like the original Ghost in the Shell movie is so iconic. You could randomly pause it if you watch it, and every frame in it almost is like a sort of a famous image. So there is stuff to draw on beyond the sort of the intellectual side of it, but I don't know if it'll work without it. Now the interesting tidbit of news that came out. So Scarlett Johansson has already been cast in it as the protagonist, Major Motoko Kusanagi. Which caused a little bit of a stir. I said I would steer clear of politics, but there was a sort of a social politics mini uproar because, you know, it's a Japanese franchise and they cast a Caucasian woman in it. I actually think to me, that grievance is acceptable sometimes, and other times less so. Like Akira, which has been rumored to be in development for like a Hollywood movie forever. That would be really weird if they just recast American actors in it. Ghost in the Shell, specifically because it deals with like people being put in fake bodies and stuff, strikes me as less critical. There's even, like in the movie and in the show, they even kind of joke about the fact, because the Major Kusanagi is she's a robot. I mean, she does have a human soul, but even that is kind of explored and pondered. Is she really a person? Was she born inside the internet and put in a robot body? Is she even a woman? Because she's in a woman's body, but she has a lesbian relationship in it at some point and stuff. And there's always this sort of, she even kind of cracks jokes about having been a man at some point, like in a man's body and stuff. It's this sort of very identity fluid future. So I don't think it's that jarring to cast someone like Scarlett Johansson in it. But so now Michael Pitt, who is, I don't know, he was in Boardwalk Empire and other stuff. He's been cast as the main villain, which has been revealed to be the Laughing Man, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. The main one being that the Laughing Man is not in the Ghost in the Shell movie. He's in the TV show Standalone Complex and the manga. But forget about them. I'm not gonna make this too complicated by trying to like explain like the whole the manga and the anime and stuff. So just there's the movies and there's the TV show, and they have all the same characters, but they don't exist within the same continuity. It just isn't. Like the movies are their own thing. There's 2 movies and they're sequels of each other, and then there's the show that's its own thing, 2 seasons of the show, and then there's a prequel series called Ghost in the Shell Arise that's also its own sort of continuity. It has slight differences. One of the characters is in one of the iterations, he's like the new guy on the team, and another one he's been there for a while. The differences are very subtle, but they're just not, they're not, you can't fit them all on like a single timeline. They're their own timelines, but they're similar enough so that they didn't really change anything around. It's just the continuity that's different. But the Laughing Man, is a really interesting villain, but the problem is that his storyline, the Standalone Complex Laughing Man storyline, is very, very deeply sort of couched in that whole intellectual philosophy thing that I just mentioned. It's one of the lesser sort of action-y, adventure-y plots in Ghost in the Shell, so it's kind of weird that they did that. It would sort of be easier to just do the first movie, like to redo the first Ghost in the Shell movie, which is slightly less so kind of existential and stuff, and is just more kind of action-y and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know. It would be, I mean, I'm certainly curious. I don't have any expectations of it, certainly, but I don't know. I mean, I just want to see what they do. I don't think that the people they've assembled for it on the production side are particularly good. But yeah, I mean, I'm always someone, I would rather they make something and have it be bad than not ever make it and me like wonder, like, I wonder what a live action movie of this would look like or that would look like. Like, I would always rather just have one, and if it's bad, who cares? You know what I mean? Like Aeon Flux is something that I loved for years before they made a live action adaptation of it with Charlize Theron, and it's terrible and forgettable, but so what? Then nobody talks about it, and people just still focus on the cartoon and how awesome it was, even though I still think that Aeon Flux has some cool like visuals and stuff, the Charlize Theron movie. But ultimately it also, once again, it failed because it kind of threw out the stuff that made Aeon Flux interesting, which was the weirdness and the philosophy of the 2 different countries, Brenna and whatever the other one is, and the dynamic between Aeon and the bad guy, Gordon, whatever his name is, because they're enemies, but they're also lovers. It's this really weird back and forth, and it's very hypersexual in a kind of a cyberpunky way, and they didn't really do that. They just made it kind of generic sci-fi movie in the future type thing. Kind of like World War Z, another good example of a movie that I dislike because the book is so unbelievably amazing, but it's the kind of book that's hard to make into a movie because it's not protagonist oriented. It's kind of like an anthology of different stories about the timeline of like zombie apocalypse. And that's what makes it so cool. But then when they made it into a movie, they just made like generic Brad Pitt zombie movie that has very, very, very little to do with World War Z. Even I know someone the guy who wrote it, Max Brooks, he's Mel Brooks' son. Someone I know met him at a book signing before the movie came out and said, "So how about that movie?" And he said something along the lines like, "Oh, you mean that Brad Pitt movie?" Sort of in like a kind of a dismissive tone, but that's sort of what it is. They could have easily just called it, The Zombies Are Coming or whatever, and it likely would have made lots of money and not insulted people who love the book. That I never get. I never understand the desire to bank on name recognition when you know that you're just going to alienate the people who recognize that name. If you're going to do that, why not? Like, the people who love World War Z love it because it's because they consider it like a fast-paced, interesting sort of Brad Pitt action movie with zombies in it. But then who gives a shit what it's called? Like, they would probably like it, just give it some other title and then make a World War Z movie and actually make it World War Z. That is something I never really got, but whatever. I'm not a Hollywood guy, so hold on, I'm going to take a drink. I explained last week that if I want to drink something as I'm doing this, I have two choices. I can either take like a 5-second, like a 5-second silence and take a sip, or I could do that and then edit out those silences. But that's way too much work, ladies and gentlemen, and space aliens and robots from the future. So you're just going to have to put up with like a couple of 5-second silences as I drink this rum and Coke. So hold on one second. So I think that's about it. There was a little bit of Rogue One images came out and stuff like that. Not too much yet. A little bit of news about what movies are going to have like trailers and TV spots during the Super Bowl, which is airing. It's not airing. It's being played this Sunday. I'm recording this on Friday, so you might be listening to this after the Super Bowl. There's going to be like a Ninja Turtles thing and a Bourne thing and a couple other things. Heavily rumored to have at least one Civil War, like maybe a new Civil War trailer, which if they do, you can bet your ass I'll be talking about next week. Alice Through the Looking Glass, which I'm very uninterested in. But Ninja Turtles, interestingly enough, I wasn't a huge fan of the Michael Bay Turtles. It wasn't bad. I thought it was going to be awful. I went into it like, oh, here we go again with Michael Bay, and it's bullshit. But it was actually kind of fun, especially the turtle. I thought the turtles were very good in it, like very funny and sort of entertaining. The thing I really didn't like about it is the whole destiny. Everything now is a destiny. The Amazing Spider-Man, they had to make like, oh, his parents were scientists and there was some kind of conspiracy and everybody's the fucking chosen one these days. So now it's the turtles. It's like April O'Neil. Oh, there were her turtles when she was a young girl and her father was a scientist. Like everything's connected. Nothing's just random anymore. It's not like, oh, April O'Neil's a reporter. Because if you remember the 1990 Turtles movie, they just save her from being mugged or whatever. It's kind of like a by random chance, and they happen to like her because they see her reporting like Michelangelo's like, you're a babe or whatever. So they kind of hook up. Here it has to be some kind of story where it eventually ends up that they have some connection. And I was just like, do we really need that? And it was whatever. It was kind of blah. But now the trailer for the sequel looks kind of interesting. They have like Bebop and Rocksteady. They have Casey Jones. They have supposedly Krang and the Technodrome, which we haven't seen yet, but that's all rumors and innuendo. But if they do that and they have like Baxter Stockman in it, like if they do that, if they bring all the interesting characters, because the Ninja Turtles world has a lot of interesting characters. Usagi Yojimbo and the alligator croc, whatever, and they have the frogs, the turtle doppelgangers who are frogs. There's a lot of interesting sort of colorful characters in it that you could totally bring in. And they kind of forewent that in the first one, but it looks like they're getting back into sort of that Turtles mythology, and I think that'll be cool. Like, I think the sequel actually has a chance of being something really fun and worth watching. So we'll see on Sunday what kind of footage and what stuff is going to be airing from all of these projects, and then, as I said, I might be talking about it next week. There's a bunch of stuff that's that we're still waiting on. Most notably, as I said, Rogue One, which still doesn't have a trailer out. There's very little info on it. That's pretty suspicious. I mean, we're already in mid-February. It's coming out in December. Most big movies of this caliber already have some kind of promotional material out by this point. And these don't. This one doesn't yet. I kind of like that, but it's I'm dying. I mean, they have to put something out before, because they got May 4th. That's Star Wars Day, May the 4th. Blah, blah, blah. And The Force Awakens is coming out on Blu-ray like in April. I think they might do it before that, but who knows? Yeah, we'll see. We will see. So yeah, another sip, and then we're going to talk about this week's topic, which is you'll have to find out. Stay tuned in 5 seconds to find out. Okay, so I thought I was going to talk about nitpicking movies this week, and the reason is because I got into a little bit of an argument online with someone about Fury Road, which I've mentioned before ad nauseum that I love. And we're just talking about Fury Road on some message board or something like that, and someone said that they didn't enjoy it, and I was curious to know why, and the reasons that this person brought up struck me as very nitpicky. And I said to him, "You're being very nitpicky, and that's weird." And he said to me, "What are you talking about? You love to nitpick movies." And he's correct. I do often nitpick movies. I'm a fan of like watching bad movies and just tearing them to shreds. And by bad movies, by the way, I'm not talking about like Sharknado or whatever. I'm talking about movies that are, because to me, Sharknado was made to be a bad movie. To me, a good bad movie needs to be a movie that the people making thought they were making something special. That's the single most important criteria of a truly enjoyable bad movie, is that the people involved in it didn't know they were doing something bad. They thought they were doing something amazing. A Neil Breen movie, or there's a great movie on Netflix called Branded, which is the guy who made it clearly thought that he was some auteur, artistic genius, and that movie is beyond bad, but in an amazing, highly rewatchable way. So yeah, I love watching movies and like bad movies and like making fun of them and stuff, a la, like Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst or whatever. So I was giving this a little thought, and I've been trying to crystallize my opinion on nitpicking movies, and what I said to that person, and what I'm going to repeat now, is that it really depends on what movie you're nitpicking and what in the movie you're nitpicking. Okay, so for instance, this guy who was talking about Mad Max was commenting on things like, he said, the tires on the cars, they all look way too new to me. This is a post-apocalyptic world. That, how can you tires, and they're for a world that's very low on fuel, they're very wasteful. They have like flamethrowers and stuff like that. That's all very inefficient, and the reason to me that is the kind of nitpicking that I don't enjoy is that if you watch Mad Max, it's clearly not the type of movie that's trying to be realistic. It's like a fairy tale that's set in a post-apocalyptic landscape. In the same sense that Inglourious Bastards, when Quentin Tarantino made Inglourious Bastards, he set out to make a Western, but one that was set in Europe during World War II. He was like, the style of this movie, it's still a Western. It uses all the tropes of a Western. It uses a lot of like, tricks, and pays homage to Westerns and stuff. It just doesn't take place in the Wild West, which is a very interesting idea, a very cool idea, I thought, and something that can be sort of endlessly attempted in other genres. And Mad Max is a good example of that. It's kind of like a fairy tale or a fantasy epic, a la like Lord of the Rings or whatever, but one that takes place in like a post-apocalyptic landscape. And in that kind of environment, it doesn't really matter that a lot of it doesn't make sense. That, for example, a thing that he said was like, you know, they have winches. Immortan Joe, he lives in the Citadel, and the Citadel is protected because it's these like big towers of rock, and the aristocracy, like the higher ups or whatever, they live up in the rock towers where they can't be assailed. And the way they get up there is these winches. There's these like platforms that you winch up. And the way they winch them up is there's these big flywheels that people like walk on and kind of spin like giant hamster wheels, but they're like ladders. Like they climb on them from the outside, and their climbing makes it spin. And he said, like, that's so dumb. Like that makes no sense at all. And I said, that's not the point. The point of that, it was sort of a visual metaphor. It was just meant to show like how subjugated these people are, and like how decadent this warlord is, to the point where, like, you know, it's a post-apocalyptic landscape, but he can afford to have people act as a winch for him. And, you know, and he has, he takes out a giant monster truck, and its entire purpose is to play like war music as he's going to take care of his business. It's completely wasteful. It makes absolutely no sense, but that doesn't matter. It's not meant to matter. It's meant to be this visually rich sort of allegory. It's about emotions. It's about giving you like an emotional impact and a visual impact, he has a lot of very striking imagery in it. And that's way more the point. So nitpicking that isn't fun, because it's not fun to point out a mistake somebody made if they didn't make a mistake. If they didn't give a shit about the accuracy when they were making it, then saying, haha, you fucked this up is irrelevant, because they weren't trying to. It's like if some like fashion designer designed a dress that had one sleeve and the other side doesn't have a sleeve. Like I'm sure you've seen that once. There's like it's like a sort of a design that you see like on runways and stuff. Like it's a dress that has one long sleeve and the other one's like the shoulders exposed. So like it would be like if some kind of fashion critic would look at that and go like, you forgot to put the other sleeve in. This dress is stupid. And to be like, no, I did that on purpose. Like it's not, if you don't like it, that's perfectly valid. But to call that out as a mistake is an empty victory if the person wasn't trying to get that thing right. Which goes back into my thing about people who make movies knowing that they're going to be bad, like Sharknado. It's not fun to make fun of Sharknado for being bad, because they knew it was bad. They were like, oh, that take was awful. Keep it in, you know? Like, what you want is, you want an awful take that the director thought wasn't awful, and thought like, this is genius. You just gave me an Orson Wellesian performance, cut, print, perfect, like Ed Wood kind of stuff, like where he really thought he was making something amazing. That's why I love that movie, Ed Wood. Because he really thought he was on to something, and he really wasn't. But that's why it's so fascinating. Another good example of this is like Star Wars. I read an article recently. Now, in fairness to this article, it wasn't exactly nitpicking on that level, but it was a whole article about, and spoiler alert for The Force Awakens, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't seen The Force Awakens, you're like, what, do you live in like, I don't know, the Australian outback? Like, why haven't you, if you like this kind of stuff? So, but if not, I mean, if by some miracle you haven't, then there's going to be a teeny spoiler ahead. But I read an article, I think it was on Wired, maybe, trying to explain why Starkiller Base made no sense scientifically. And Neil deGrasse Tyson also did this, and I'm a former fan of his. I used to like him a lot, and now he's just a fuddy-duddy who does exactly this thing that I don't like, which is nitpick things that they weren't trying to get right. So, because what Starkiller Base does is it sucks up a sun. That's actually not what it does, but it's only explained in the novelization. But for all intents and purposes, it sucks up a sun and then fires that energy out in the form of a hyper light speed some kind of laser blast that blows up a planet or multiple planets. And they were explaining how, well, if, you suck up a sun, its mass is this many times larger than that of the planet that Star Killer Base is built into it. It would crush it. The gravity would increase and stuff. And I'm reading this article and saying to myself, like, first of all, one, who cares? And second of all, like, you're ignoring the fact that this is a civilization that has gravity manipulation control. Like, their ships are all, even a small ship like the Millennium Falcon has artificial gravity on it. So they're clearly able to counteract, like they're able to create artificial gravity, which generally also implies that you're able to counteract increased gravity, like make 0G, like anti-gravity. So you could clearly like counteract the effects of the increased mass of the thing. They also call it, they have a name for it in the movie. It's called a harmonic oscillator or something. It's some made up, a made up device that contains it, because then they blow up the harmonic oscillator. And what happens is the planet kind of crushes inward and becomes a sun, which is really cool. Like, I like that climax shot of it kind of crushing into itself and like just becoming the sun. But yeah, like, it's not like Star Trek, and even Star Trek, I wouldn't go down that road of like trying to nitpick it. Something like The Martian, which I've mentioned already, and is a book and also a movie that really tries to do things scientifically. Like, if you were to nitpick that is a movie that begs sort of scientific scrutiny, because it really goes into like, well, if I burn this many liters of hydrazine, it will create this many cubic feet of water vapor, and then I have this much nitrogen in my acre of soil that'll grow this many potato plants. Like, it really gets into that kind of nitty gritty science. So then if you want to come along and say, no, you got it wrong, like hydrazine breaks down into this many molecules of water vapor, not that many, that's perfectly fine. And there is actually one glaring scientific problem with The Martian that even Andy Weir, the guy who wrote it, said he knew, but he just had to put in, which is the fact that there's a storm in the beginning. The whole engine of the plot is that there's a storm that forces Ares 3 to cancel their mission early because their ship's going to tip over in this crazy storm. And then as they're trying to leave, like, it blows off something and it hits Mark Watney, the guy that Matt Damon plays, and they think he's dead, so they leave him there, but he's not dead. The problem is Mars can't get storms like that. It doesn't have enough atmosphere to create storms that can blow, that can tip over a rocket. And like, if you watch the movie, it's this like tornado level, like on Earth storm, and that can't happen there. But Andy Weir was like, look, I needed something to create like the fact that they had to leave. And so I was just like, fuck it. But that's fine. I mean, I'm sure he could have figured out something else, right? Like, Matt Damon fell down a cliff or something and they thought he was dead. But I'm just trying to contrast what kind of movie is a movie that lends itself to that sort of analysis and what isn't. And we can't talk about nitpicking without discussing my biggest pet peeve, which is when people think that characters making stupid decisions in movies is a plot hole. I'm just going to say this once and for all. Stupid character decisions are not plot holes. They're not. If every character always made the best decision at the right time, there would be no drama in any movie. Not to mention the fact that people mostly make stupid decisions in real life too. Like, you're trying to act as though a person not making the right call at the right time is not realistic. That is more realistic than someone making the right call at the right time. Now, there are exceptions to this. If you're going to say like, oh, this guy's a biologist and he didn't know that, X and Y because you learn that in like, biology 101. I get it. But if someone says like, the classic cliche is like, oh, there's a, like a horror movie cliche, like, oh, there's an axe murder, so you run upstairs instead of running out the house. That's not a plot hole. That's people panicking and doing stupid things, which is what people do when they panic. They actually do stupid things. One one cliche / trope that is a stupid decision that I consider a plot hole is one that involves time travel, and it's that when people have a chance to go back and stop an event, they always go back to a moment that creates dramatic tension. Like, for instance, just a dumb example of this is the like Star Trek Generations, the movie, where Picard has to stop Malcolm McDowell from destroying the star. Instead of going back like 5 days before Malcolm McDowell like revealed that he was the villain and like he met him on the Enterprise, instead of like going back that far and like arresting him or killing him, he has to go back to like 5 minutes before he launches his fucking rocket. Or even in Back to the Future, where Marty goes back to the Twin Pine malls, he goes back to like the parking lot right as Doc's getting fucking shot. Like, he couldn't go back like 2-3 hours earlier than that. Now I understand something that I say a lot. I excuse a lot of this stuff away by using creative license. Like, I understand that there's a need for, because I just said this like 30 seconds ago. Like, if everybody made the right decision, there would be no excitement or drama or tension. But that's such an overused sort of plot device that it kind of gets grating to me, where people are like, oh, you can go back, you could do whatever you want, you could go back to any time you want, and instead of like, you know, saying like, I'm just gonna go back to when you were a baby and fucking kill you then, I'm gonna try and like confront you when you're at your full strength. Like in if we're gonna go back to the TNG movies, in Star Trek First Contact, the Borg go back to the time that First Contact happened. Why didn't they go back to like the Victorian era and just assimilate all of Earth like in the 19th century? Like, they had to go back to like the late 21st century. That makes very little sense, but whatever. But yeah, as I said, that whole idea of a bad decision not necessarily constituting a plot hole, because people make bad decisions all the time. And another thing about the nitpicking thing is, I think there's a big difference between nitpicking a movie that's good and nitpicking a movie that's bad. A movie that's good, and a movie, and by good I mean like fun and entertaining and engaging. I'm way more forgiving of a movie like that than a movie that's just like plagued by that kind of stuff, and it really brings it down. Like, I thought Jurassic World was kind of plagued by that kind of stuff, which made it unfun to me. Like, the characters made no sense, and it was just like, oh, the Indominus Rex is escaped. Call start the alarm, and then the park guy's got to be like, no, because we're gonna lose money, and I'm a businessman, and we're supposed to not like losing money. Avatar, a really good example of a movie that is just awful, and a big part of that is because the villains are so cookie cutter. It's like, oh, I'm gonna kill all of these intelligent aliens because I'm gonna make some money out of it, because I'm a businessman and we like to make money, even if it involves killing lots of people for no reason. It's just like, ugh, really? You couldn't come up with like a slightly better reason for him to do it? Yeah, and also continuity, like I said, artistic license. So I'll give you two examples. At the end of The Force Awakens, spoiler alert, Rey and Chewbacca, they go find Luke Skywalker. And so they take the Millennium Falcon, and they get in the Millennium Falcon, they hit the hyperdrive, light speed or whatever it's called, and it's like 10 seconds later, they pull it back and they're on the planet that he's in. And someone says like, that's really? It was just like 10 seconds of flight in light speed. I was like, no, it doesn't matter. Like, there are a couple of cuts during that scene. It was just like, that cut could have been, an 18-hour cut. That's what I mean by artistic license. There was no real need to show you how long it took, because in Star Wars, the amount of time it takes for you to get from point A to point B is irrelevant. It's not part of the sort of the mythos of it. In Star Trek, for instance, that was sort of part of it. It was like, well, Captain, we fly at warp 9. It will take us 18 hours at warp 9. At warp 5, it will take 5 days. That's my Worf impression, by the way. So yeah, that like the duration sort of plays into it sometimes. So that maybe would be kind of odd. But here it was more like, it doesn't matter. They flew there. They got there. it doesn't like it's unimportant. And I'm going to go back to Star Trek for a second. There's in the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek, there's a scene where they're in the shuttle bay and Spock gets into the turbo lift, and then he's in there for like 3 seconds and the camera kind of pans around him and then he walks out and he's on the bridge. Now the bridge is all the way up on the top of the ship. The cargo bay is all the way on the bottom of the ship. It takes way longer than that, but that's a great example of how artistic license renders that the passage of time irrelevant. It was just a cool shot where he walks in and the camera kind of slow pans around him, and then he walks out, and then it kind of flies into like a rear head shot to follow him like onto the bridge. It doesn't matter that it took 45 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. It's just a cool shot. And the length of time in the turbo lift is immaterial to the story, and therefore it's very easy to like play with that and be fluid. That again, I wouldn't consider any kind of plot hole or any kind of a continuity mistake. Yeah, like that's exactly the kind of thing that I don't mind. I mind a lot more when, like what I just described with Avatar and in Jurassic World also a little bit, like where it's these people who are bad, but there's no real reason for it. They're bad because they're bad guys, and it's like, what's your motivation? Like, you're just being evil, and people are gonna get killed. Like, you want people to get killed? Why? That's just gonna make shit harder for you, regardless. Like, you're a scientist. You're doing genetic study on dinosaurs. You're probably being funded exclusively because Jurassic World is like a popular park. If anybody dies there, that's the end of your research. Like, you're gonna wanna keep it safe more than anyone, and yet you're being so super cavalier about this because you're a bad villain guy. That I don't like. That I could totally do without. By the way, I'm a big fan of Man of Steel. I know that's a very controversial movie, but one of the reasons is that Zod in that movie, if you compare that movie to Superman 2, Zod in Superman 2 is just like, I'm a Kryptonian and we're superior and humans are insects and, kneel before Zod. That whole scene with the president, it's just like, I'm an alien from space. I have godlike powers here. You're a puny earthling and I'm going to dominate you. In Man of Steel, Zod is like a general who is tasked with the survival of his species, and the only way that he's going to do it, like, his species is going to go extinct unless he kills humanity. That's like the only way. Like, that's basically his only option. Kill all the humans because this planet is good. Like, he can turn it into Krypton. He can terraform it into being Krypton, essentially. But that would involve killing the local population. But that's his only option. So then later he becomes kind of obsessed with Kal-El, and he's clearly a villain in it. But at least you can understand where he's coming from. It's not just like, ultimate power is my goal, because that's just boring. I mean, it's really hard to sell. That's the one thing I think they're going to have a little bit of trouble with Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, because Thanos seemingly, because I don't know, I haven't read the Marvel comics, I just know from like what I see of him in the movies, seemingly Thanos' motivation is basically he's super powerful person who wants to be even more super powerful, which I'm not saying is something that can never work, but it's you got to work harder. You got to make the character more interesting and more sort of engaging if their motivation is that simplistic. And on that note, I'm looking up at the timer, and I've noticed that I've been talking for quite a while, even though I thought I wouldn't have that much to discuss this week, which is, so I guess that's a good thing. So I think I'm gonna close this off, and once again thank everybody for sharing and commenting and liking it and talking to me about it, suggesting things and whatnot. And once again, I am at Neon Taster, but podcast related questions, comments, jokes, insults, at Neoncast, and also neoncastpod at gmail.com. So yeah, like if you want to know, I don't know, if there's some movie that you want me to watch or interested in, I don't know, and like, that kind of stuff that I talk about here, you've heard me speak for several hours at this point. Let me know. I can reiterate my recommendation that you go and watch Bokudake ga Inai Machi, Erased, the anime. Episode 5 aired this week. It is a fantastic suspense thriller, really well made, very not anime-y. If you're not a fan of like anime tropes and stuff, and I you know what, I get that. I'm a big anime fan, but I totally get why some of the stylistic anime stuff is off-putting to people. This really doesn't have a lot of that. It's just a story that uses anime as its medium. It's not very anime-ish. It could easily be made into like a live action show, movie. It's very adult, even though it has kids in it, but I don't want to get into that because it's kind of spoilery. But yeah, a totally good show. And I'll just keep plugging that every week, I guess. All right, at Neoncast, neoncastpod at gmail.com. You've been listening to the Neoncast, if you have been listening. And if not, then why am I talking to you? Bye.